Well, we are following some breaking news right now. A verdict has been reached in the federal corruption trial of New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. A jury just finding Menendez guilty on all counts. The senator faced 16 felony counts, including accepting bribes of gold and cash to use his influence to deliver favors that would help 3 New Jersey businessmen. That decision caps a nearly 2-month trial in which Senator Menendez did not take the stand in his defense. Jurors also heard from more than 36 witnesses before reaching today's verdict. The defense insisting Menendez did not take a single bribe. They blamed the senator's wife, Nadine Menendez, for keeping him in the dark about illegal dealings with 3 New Jersey businessmen. Fox 5's Teresa Perillo is outside of the courthouse with more on this. And Teresa, I know just about an hour ago we spoke to you and you mentioned something about how the jurors were dressed that may have been a slight indication that the verdict was possibly coming down today.
This is one of those times, Bianca, where I guess I was just able to read the tea leaves correctly. This has been a case in which these jurors deliberated for roughly 13 hours. The notes that they sent us yesterday seem to indicate that they were really taking this seriously. They were taking their civic responsibility seriously. They asked, for example, the very first note was, do we need to find somebody guilty or not guilty on each individual count? Remember, some of these counts involve multiple people. Senator Menendez, Fred Davies, who is a developer in New Jersey, as well as Will Hanna, who was essentially the go-between with the prosecution alleged deep connections to Egypt, and one of the reasons why Senator Menendez was embroiled in these schemes. Now, I'm looking through the verdict sheet right now. As I understand it, we're roughly up to count 9, and it has so far been a complete and total sweep for the government. They have found that Senator Menendez, along with his cohorts, Fred Davies and Will Hanna, did in fact accept bribes. He demanded bribes, and he did all of this to essentially line his own pockets. That when he was as a sitting senator, and remember, chairman of the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, that the actions that he took, the influence that he gave, was in order to line his own pockets. This is really something quite stunning when you think about the fact that Senator Menendez has had a long history of allegations against him, dating back to 2006 when he initially was appointed in office. Back then, it was alleged by then U.S. Attorney Chris Christie that he was essentially flouting Senate rules and taking money from the federal government, lining his pockets when he owned a real estate property in Hudson County. Those charges were never pursued. Chris Christie dropped those. Then we had the case in 2011 and 2012 in which there were allegations that Senator Menendez demanded bribes in order to pass along the permits for the U.S. Corps of Army Engineers when it came to building American Dream. Those charges were never pursued as well by the feds. Then we had the case that ended in a hung jury back in 2017. Similar allegations to what he faced in this trial as well. Allegations that he used his influence as a sitting senator, one of the most powerful Democrats in the country, to line his own pockets. And now we have this case. Essentially, this is the one that stuck. 16 counts against the senator. And as I am following along, as many of my colleagues are, and surely many of our viewers are following along, it looks at this point to be a total sweep, including theft of honest services, conspiracy to commit bribery, as well as acting as a foreign agent. Remember, Senator Menendez, as head of the Foreign Relations Committee, had access when he was chairman to the most classified information, the most classified secrets that this government possesses. And the government alleged, and this jury found, that he used that access improperly, that he withheld $99 million in aid to Egypt, which, by the way, in terms of countries that we give aid to, Egypt is only second to the aid that we give to Israel. They alleged that he, in fact, withheld that aid so that his friend, Will Hanna, his co-defendant, could receive a very lucrative contract for a halal import business. Essentially, the beef that is, the cattle that is raised here in the U.S., it is imported to Egypt. And there are only about 4 to 5 companies that are allowed to do that. The prosecution alleged this jury found that once Senator Menendez got involved, there was only one company that was allowed to handle that monopoly. And that company was run by Will Hanna, a man who had never, ever run a business of that kind before. And so obviously there were very serious allegations against the senator here. This was a trial that went on and on. I said he appeared to be in good spirits when he was inside today. Perhaps he thought that the longer it went, the better it was for him, but this verdict does not suggest that. I talked to the senator on the way out yesterday. He says clearly this case isn't as simple as the state wants it to be. On the way in today, he said we're just waiting on a jury. I can tell you in past days we've seen the senator, heard the senator, and seen him singing in the hallway, belting out, looking out onto Lower Manhattan, looking out at the Verrazano Bridge and singing. I don't know what song it was, but he seemed to be trying to calm his nerves and keep in good spirits. And now today, this verdict. His family is here, although his wife, Nadine Menendez, not in the courtroom today. And it was filed last night that her trial is now delayed indefinitely as she fights stage 3 breast cancer. So that is the latest from what we can tell you right now at this point, Bianca. Our crews inside, which include Antoine Lewis, will be running me out a full verdict sheet in just a little bit. They are not allowed to leave the courtroom as the verdict was beginning to be read. That's why I'm out here and he's in there. So we're expecting some color from Antoine as to what happened. It really is we cannot underscore this enough. This is a shocking development for somebody who has not only represented the state of New Jersey for the better part of the last 18 to 20 years, but somebody who was largely involved in local politics, a player of the highest magnitude, and somebody who was one of the most powerful Democrats, powerful politicians in this country, somebody who yielded incredible significance, will now find himself in a federal prison accused and convicted of being a foreign agent, of accepting bribes, of obstructing justice, and on and on and on. We will send it back to you in the studio, Bianca.
Yeah, pretty heavy verdict there, considering all the facts that he was accused of. And just going to stay on top of this as well. I know you were inside that courtroom. We're going to talk to Antoine as well as their reaction to the jurors. But joining us now with more perspective on today's verdict is Leslie Feldman, political science professor at Hofstra University. Leslie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Just first of all, tell us how historical this is, and maybe were you expecting this guilty verdict?
I was expecting it. The amazing thing is that it took 4 days to come down. If you have a closet full of gold bars, $100 bills in bags and stuffed in pockets, coat pockets, a Mercedes Benz, and your excuse is that your wife likes jewelry, that's not a very convincing excuse. So I thought, like the first day, there would be a conviction. But yeah, it's historic. Unfortunately, it reinforces the idea that politicians are crooks.
That's unfortunate to hear, because I know we see this in the past year and a half, that we're seeing a lot of them being held accountable for their actions. Let me ask you a question, though, because we're hearing about that note. There was 2 notes that the juries that they sent over. One of them saying, the first one, does a not guilty verdict on a single count require unanimity? The judge wrote back that any verdict, whether guilty or not, must be unanimous. So it shows you that there was some conversations behind closed doors that maybe they weren't all in agreement on finding him guilty on all these counts.
Right. But obviously, the people who wanted to convinced it's probably one person who was a holdout. And if everyone wants to convict except the one person has to feel very, very strongly in order to not convict. And obviously, that one person on this jury didn't feel that strongly. It seemed like convincingly that this was a guilty verdict. And, you know, it's pretty obvious circumstantial evidence. Closet full of gold bars that came out of nowhere. And the excuse for the gold bars was my wife likes jewelry. Well, as much as anyone likes jewelry, you know, I mean, even Marilyn Monroe or Elizabeth Taylor, you cannot make earrings out of a gold bar.
You're saying the smoking gun there was just too hard to deny.
Overwhelming.
Let's talk about, you just said your background as a political expert. What happens now to checks and balances in this office?
Well, I suppose he can appeal it, but I don't know. I mean, I think there's a good likelihood that he will go to jail, unless maybe he can get a pardon. You know, that's always a possibility. I don't know if he's very good friends with the president. but he could appeal it. But the evidence seems to be extremely overwhelming. In addition to the fact that Senator Menendez was on trial once before for bribery and corruption, and he got off that time. And I think, this is how people get caught. They get greedy.
Yeah.
So, the motto, quit while you're ahead, I think applied in this case.
The thing is, he did not quit, because you're talking about that 2017 mistrial. What does that say to you as a politician who decided that you expected that he got away with it the first time, and this time the defense and the excuse for it was kind of putting it on his wife?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's trying to deflect the blame, but that's not very convincing either. Also, people might resent that he's trying to throw the blame on his wife. What happens is they become emboldened, If he gets away with it the first time, they become bolder and more brash and just throwing it in the face of the FBI. See, I got away with it. I'll get away with it again. But it's very hard. A life of crime is very difficult. And if you get away with it one time, the likelihood that you're going to get away with it another time is drastically lower.
Speaking about his wife, we do know the trial of Nadine Menendez, the wife of Bob Menendez. That has been delayed by the judge indefinitely. What does that signal to you about her fate moving forward?
Unfortunately, she's ill, and so that's why they have to delay the trial. I hope she makes it. And I don't know. She's more likely to get off because she's not a politician. She doesn't have that. She doesn't really have any power. She doesn't have that much to gain. And the jury may be more sympathetic to her. And I think if she ever does go to trial, the jury will be more sympathetic to her, because nobody likes someone whose husband blamed, their corruption on you.
Yeah. In terms of maybe appealing this, well, what do you think his chances are with trying to see if this could be reversed?
Pretty much zero.
She said it right there. Zero.
I think his chances are not good. I don't know if they take into account the prior trial for corruption, but it's not a good background.
Yeah.
So the evidence is so overwhelming. This jury really is very diligent and very conscientious, because I thought that a guilty verdict would have come back in the first 24 hours. So they really looked at this evidence because they wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And that's why it took so long. And good for them. This seems like a really legitimate jury. How long did it take to convict Donald Trump of 34 felony counts? 10 minutes. So they really looked into this evidence, and they felt very confident in their decision to convict.
Yeah.
And I don't see it being an overturn unless he gets, he may be pardoned by the governor, he may be pardoned by the president. So that's something he could maybe hold out for.
All right, Leslie, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight on this. We do appreciate chatting with you.
My pleasure.
All right, Fox 5's Morgan Mackay is in the newsroom breaking down this verdict. Morgan, what is next for Menendez?
Well, Bianca, this is the first time in the Senate's 235-year history that a senator has been charged with acting as a foreign agent. So now the big question is, what's next? Well, Menendez could technically step aside, or the Senate could take up a vote to expel him. It's all going to come down to what Senator Bob Menendez decides to do. But this has big implications for the Senate right now. The Senate Democrats have a very slim majority right now in the Senate. So it's going to be tough for them. They are likely going to have to New Jersey will possibly have to appoint a new senator in the meantime. They could hold a special election. So it's going to be tough for Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer right now, as he's trying to navigate in what's going to be a tough election cycle, especially when you're going to have everybody turning out this year in this election, being a presidential election. Bianca.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Morgan. We're going to turn things over to Teresa, who is outside of the courthouse there with this verdict. Teresa, you mentioned earlier, again, we want to kind of talk about it, that you were seeing some of the jurors and how they were dressed, and it may have been an indication of what kind of verdict was going to come down today, if any. There was a difference in how they were dressed, and I know she pointed that out as a possibility of hinting at this is what likely was going to happen today and at this time.
Yeah, Bianca, so much of covering a trial, whether it be in a state court or a federal court, is understanding and just observing the tenor of the room and all of the players. And I might argue that with the exception of the defendant and maybe the judge, there is no one that is more important in that room than those jurors. And this has been a long trial, roughly 9 weeks. That is a lot of time to be sitting there, to be attempting to digest information that you don't normally have coming at you. These are not necessarily lawyers or judges or people who are proficient in any sort of legal profession that are sitting there. These are average New Yorkers, mind you, even though these Senator Menendez represents New Jersey, even though the vast majority of these crimes occurred in New Jersey, this case was seated here in Manhattan. And so these are average New Yorkers. Some work overnights. I understand one woman has 3 children. There is a man who appears to be disabled that is on the court, on the jury rather. It is incredibly diverse. And so we have seen them day in and day out in all different kinds of dress. And I will tell you, there have been a few days where I said, that person rolled out of bed and showed up to court today, and that is their right. As long as they get to that jury box by 9:30 in the morning, they are fulfilling their civic duty. But today, it just looked like they were a little bit more, the way to put it is like spruced up. They tried a little. They had sundresses on. Hair was brushed. One guy who had been wearing like a beanie on his head did not have it on today. And so I thought to myself, are they nearing the end? Perhaps. Maybe that's what's going on. And as I mentioned also at noon, I think it bears repeating, this is a very close group of people. It's not often that you see a group of 12 jurors as well as alternates ask the judge if they can delay their deliberations, the start of their deliberations a little bit, while they go out to have essentially one last lunch as a family. That doesn't happen. They've been here for 9 weeks. They want to get this done. They want to get this over with. Sure, they're taking their responsibility seriously, but they want to get back to their own lives and their own families. And this jury asked that. So my thinking and some of the other reporters, we were wondering if maybe they're going to go out after this tonight. Maybe they're going to have another meal together. They've concluded their civic service, and so perhaps this is what they're going to do, and they kind of look like they were dressed the part. I want to just point your attention behind me. Do you see all the media that was here, from, frankly, all over the world? They have their eyes trained on that front door of 500 Pearl. They are waiting for the state to come out and give comment, Menendez's defense team to come out and give comment, also the defense lawyers for Fred Davies and Will Hanna as well. And so we have our eye on that too as they wrap up. I would be very shocked, although I'm not in the courtroom right now, I'd be very shocked if Senator Menendez or either of the other 2 defendants were remanded into the custody of U.S. Marshals right now. This is typically the kind of thing in which he is given a sentencing date. He is allowed to appear for sentencing, and then they give him a date at which he has to arrive at his prison or camp. These are all white-collar crimes. He's likely not going to be in any sort of maximum security facility. We don't know if he will be in New Jersey, New York, or which of the states surrounding it they will put him, and we don't know for how long. I mean, these charges carry a significant amount of time behind bars, but do not be surprised if they run concurrent and not consecutive, as in all at the same time and not one charge right after the next. I also want to mention to you, Bianca, because I was listening to your interview with our expert, she mentioned Nadine Menendez. We heard yesterday, we heard today, but it was filed yesterday. Nadine's trial is delayed indefinitely. Now, one might think the senator was the prize here. He is the one with the influence. He is the one with the clout. He is the one that the jury found could make things happen at will. He is also the one that accepted and demanded bribes for his influence. But this is the superseding indictment. This is 66 pages. This is the indictment that was filed just last September. Nadine's name is on every single page. Every page. And if you listened at all to any of the evidence that was shown in court, time and time and time again, it showed that Nadine was essentially the conduit between the senator and these Egyptian businessmen and Fred Davies and even the government of Egypt. Time and again, they mentioned that she helped him use his power and his influence. Now, she is at this point only accused. She has not been convicted of any crimes. But frankly, with the amount of times that her name is listed in this document, you would think that this is not only a conviction for her husband, but a conviction for her as well. So we will send things back to you in the studio, Bianca. We are waiting for word from all the legal teams involved. And again, it is important to mention that all of this happened after Senator Menendez's hung jury trial in 2017. Yeah. Everything here happened from 2018 to 2023. So these are not allegations from years and years and years ago that are coming back to roost. These are crimes that were committed in the wake of him getting off of that first charge with Solomon Mendel and those accusations of bribery there. Back to you.
All right, Teresa, thank you so much for that. And today's verdict ends a historic criminal trial. Senator Bob Menendez became the first sitting senator ever tried for conspiracy. Fox 5's Teresa Perillo breaks down just exactly how we got here.
To those who were digging my political grave so that they could jump into my seat, I know who you are, and I won't forget you.
For the better part of the last 7 years, New Jersey's senior Senator Robert Menendez, a ranking member of the all-powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee, has been dodging allegations of corruption. But a look back at his time in political office will show 2 decades of insinuations of wrongdoing. Micah Rasmussen is a politics professor at Rider University.
Menendez has had a very long and storied career in New Jersey politics. He climbed up from the streets, literally school board level in Hudson County, and mastered the art of, sharp-edged politics, sharp elbows. Wasn't going to ever let anybody push him around. And, first he gained his foothold in the state legislature and then in the House, and then he moved to the Senate. And he has not been a backbencher. He's been in the leadership in the House. He has been one of the most powerful chairs of foreign relations in the entire Senate. And so he is definitely a shrewd politician. But unfortunately, has this idea about self-enrichment, about gifts that his political friends can give him.
That notion of enrichment is a theme woven throughout his career in the spotlight. It was front and center back in 2017, the last time Menendez was on trial. A federal jury deadlocked after 9 weeks. They handed him his freedom, unsure if the 3-term Democrat traded on his influence or if he really was just good friends with a Florida eye doctor named Dr. Solomon Melgen. The 18-count indictment included charges of conspiracy, bribery, and honest services fraud. An eerie precursor, although not related to the case, Menendez mounted this summer.
Senator Menendez has been for a long time kind of suspected of this improper influence where he's receiving some sort of cash or gifts in exchange for influence over his legislative duties. The previous charges that were resulted in a mistrial, those are not directly related to this case, but it does add to the overall history of problems Senator Menendez has had in the course of his time in office.
The most recent case involved gold bars, hoards of cash, a wife who allegedly had an agenda of her own, and influence with foreign businessmen, as well as allegations that pegged Menendez as a foreign agent.
That's a particularly serious and more aggravated offense compared to just bribery kind of on its face. And so the idea that a U.S. senator was engaging in bribes or other types of business deals that were inappropriate with foreign agents, in this case individuals connected to the Egyptian government, should serve as a dark and very concerning matter that was taking place in the course of his time in office.
Adding to the intrigue, as a second-term senator, Menendez was accused of trading influence for campaign contributions. In 2011, a man named Joseph Bajica of Franklin Lakes donated more than $16,000 to Menendez's re-election campaign. In 2012, Bajica admitted to donating nearly $47,000 in illegal contributions. Then in 2013, a federal investigation revealed the developers of the Meadowlands American Dream Mall were asked to donate $50,000 to Menendez's campaign in return for the senator's help getting Army Corps of Engineers permits. Ultimately, the feds didn't pursue charges there. All along, New Jerseyans continued to vote him into office.
Part of our political culture in New Jersey is, unfortunately, there is no one who had the gravitas to push him aside and say, this is enough. It was up to voters, and voters kept on returning him to office. Maybe voters kept on returning him to office because we are such a Democratic state. We have 1 million more Democrats than we have Republicans. And so the party kept on nominating him, and the voters kept on electing him. We don't really have somebody who says, all right, this is too much now. You've got to step aside.
The problems for Menendez, at least on a federal level, appear to have started in 2006, the year he took office as a U.S. Senator. He came face to face with one U.S. attorney named Chris Christie, who would later become New Jersey's governor and develop a working relationship with the senator. But in 2006, Menendez was accused of steering federal funds to a local nonprofit, collecting $300,000 in rent on a property he owned. But he rented to the North Hudson Community Action Corporation, which received federal aid, thus putting federal dollars in his pocket. At the time, Christie declined to pursue charges, and Menendez went on to serve New Jersey for the next 18 years.
I guess there is probably something in the psyche that says, if I keep on getting away with it, I can push the envelope harder and harder. You know, instead of saying, I got away with it, let me not push so hard again the next time. Let me take my lesson. Let me take my lumps and not repeat this. You know, I think a lot of us would look at it and say, yeah, Menendez, you got away with it in 2017. Now is the time to stop. But I guess he didn't see it that way.
Again, we're talking about Senator Bob Menendez, a jury finding Menendez guilty on all 16 felony counts. We're going to turn things over to Morgan Mackay, who's in the newsroom. Morgan, we're hearing some updates on the sentencing date regarding this.
Yes, Bianca, the judge has set the sentencing date for October 29th. We're also getting some new reactions. So Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has allowed Senator Bob Menendez to stay in office while this trial has continued. But today, he's calling on him to step down, saying, quote, in light of this guilty verdict, Senator Menendez must now do what is right for his constituents, the Senate, and our country, and resign. Also, Representative Andy Kim, who is a Democratic nominee set to replace Menendez. He's also now coming out calling on Menendez to also step down just to free up this seat so that somebody else can replace him during this time, possibly before the election, but it's still unclear. Maybe they'll have him be replaced in the election in November. So we're still kind of waiting to see what this all will happen. But to put things in perspective, this has been a lengthy trial. We are in the 10th week of this trial, and jury deliberations lasted for about 12 hours. That's 6 hours less than the entire closing arguments that lawyers on both sides gave. So it's been a lengthy process, and prosecutors really focusing on those gold bars and the $500,000 in cash found in Menendez's home, as well as the convertible. Now, his team had been arguing that those gold bars were passed down in his family. They also said that there was no evidence that the money exchanged hands. So they really were trying to focus and push back on some of these arguments. And they just really were saying, don't buy the story that the prosecution was saying. But of course, as you could see, the jury did convict him on all 16 felony counts. Bianca?
Morgan, thank you so much for the update. We're going to turn things over to a guest in-house, someone that I know very well who's always talked about so many big cases that break here in Manhattan. Peter Frankel, a criminal defense attorney. When we started talking about this case, when it first came to light, it seemed like it was something out of a movie. Gold bars, Mercedes-Benz, bags of cash. It was pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you know, assuming that the jury was able to even get past that fact, there was so much more, because you have to remember, this spanned 4 years, and this was a bunch of different kind of mini trials all in one trial. And if you followed the trial, you know that there were superseding indictments, which meant that the government kept coming up with more evidence and more evidence. And, you know, at the end of the day, he was essentially fighting 4 trials in one.
It's pretty incredible. But it seems that this mounting evidence, where some people would say we could have came with that verdict in 5 minutes, it looks like these jurors were really taking their time to understand and digest everything that was being given to them, especially the fact that yesterday they asked these 2 questions, you know, asking whether unanimous in all counts in this case where the judge had to find that. So it seemed like there were some deliberations behind closed doors.
I think that's exactly right. You know, typically you would say, well, it's usually a day of deliberations for a week of testimony. This was 9 weeks, and the evidence was really overwhelming. So the fact that the jury was out, you know, 2.5 days, and they had a note yesterday where they asked whether or not they needed to be unanimous in order to acquit on a count. You know, clearly they were going methodically from one count to the next, to the next, to the next.
Yeah.
And that's what you expect from a jury in New York, and that's what you want, either side.
Does this surprise you at all, the verdict coming down on this one?
look, the defense really had their work cut out for them, you know, especially when Judge Stein severed Nadine Menendez's case, and the defense had the ability then to at least try to blame her, but there was so much evidence, and it was just an uphill battle from the very beginning. And honestly, the fact that they were out this long, I think, is somewhat of a surprise.
Really? So an uphill battle. So say you represented someone like Bob Menendez. How would you go about this with this overwhelming amount of evidence that points to him doing some very guilty things?
Yeah, and let's not forget, there was a co-defendant who turned cooperator, right? Jose Uribe, who testified against Mr. Menendez. And you have to remember that Jose Uribe had a long sordid past as well, but he was able to fill in some of the blanks as it related to the count for him, and that was really helpful to the jury in understanding how Mr. Menendez was operating, because if you listen to the summations, defense was saying there are no texts, there are no voicemails, there are no emails, there is nothing directly connecting Mr. Menendez to any of these allegations, except when Jose Uribe filled in the blanks. He was important.
Does that maybe, I guess, in terms of like just how the law works, when you're saying that there's no direct evidence that connects him to this, but there is one person saying, yes, he did. Does that worry you? Maybe as a defense attorney or even as a prosecutor, you're saying this is not as much evidence as I needed, but it's enough to put this guy in prison? Well,
sure. It always worries you as a defense attorney when there's a cooperator who was directly involved with your client. You do your best to try to discredit that person. The defense raised some other issues with respect to Mr. Menendez and how busy he was and how he and his wife kept their finances separate. But at the end of the day, it really wasn't enough to come close to rising the bar to the level of reasonable doubt for any of the counts.
Do you think Uribe was the nail in the coffin for this case?
I think he was clearly a very, very important piece of the puzzle for the government, and I think they were very, very happy that he was willing to turn and cooperate for them.
What happens next? Let's talk about an appeals process. Obviously, you're just going to assume that Menendez's team is going to do that. But actually, before we get to that, we're going to turn things over to a live interview. But before that, we're going to be finished with our interview. Thank you so much, Peter. We appreciate your time. And we're being wrapped and cut short, so we got to get straight to the commercial break.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. All right, we'll have much more coming up on the 5 p.m. news and the 6 p.m. as well.
Much for joining us on Live Now from Fox, really giving us some great insight and analysis on this. We really